Hi, everyone. My name is Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence here at Trend Micro, and welcome to my monthly threat webinar series. This is August 2022, and I'm going to be covering our mid-year security report. We're actually going to be publishing that tomorrow, so you're going to see a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of what's going on. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. There is a Q&A button that you should have access to. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in there. I'll try to answer those at the end of the slide deck. And if I don't get to your question, hopefully I can get you an answer outside. So let's get started with the presentation. So the report's going to be called Defending the Expanding Attack Surface. So this is our 2022 mid-year report. We do these reports every year. This one is going to take a look back at the first half of 2022, and we look at the different types of attacks. Let me talk a little bit about that. So Trend Micro, obviously, we gather a ton of attack surface intelligence. This comes from many different areas around the world. So if you look at different solutions that we have out there protecting our customers, we've got endpoint product, cloud product, we've got products running at the servers, we've got products looking at email traffic, even at the IoT level, whether it's consumer IoT, industrial IoT, we've got web traffic data that we look at, network traffic, lateral movement traffic, even accounts now we're looking at. Because of the credential theft issue that organizations are having. So we pull all of this intelligence and data. It comes, like I said, it comes from around the world. It also comes from our 400,000 commercial customers and 20 million consumer customers. So we get a lot of threat intelligence. We take it all, we bring it all in, we analyze it, we modify, we look at it, we correlate it, we collaborate it. All of that kind of stuff happens in the back end. We've got a number of data lakes that we have access to, and we build out. And all of this intelligence then gets looked at. And so what we did for our mid-year report is we obviously looked at all the data from the first 6 months of the year. And we started to pull out, what was interesting, what attacks were interesting, those kind of things. We also look at in total, we get about 2.5 trillion events per day that come into the Trend Micro data lakes and allows our both human analysis as well as automated analysis to identify all of the new threats that are targeting our customers. So that's kind of where we pull the data, how we pull the data, and gives us the ability to actually produce these reports on a regular basis. Now, one of the things we did in the first half, we actually did a survey with Sapio Research, and we surveyed about 6,300 IT security decision makers around the world because we wanted to get more information about the attack surface and what the concerns are around the attack surface. And so one of the things you can see here, 73% of IT decision makers are concerned about it, about the digital attack surface. 43%, so almost half, argue that the attack surface is spiraling out of control. And 37% describe the attack surface as constantly evolving and messing. So obviously, as the threat actors are out there targeting organizations and doing harm, they're obviously looking at how can I target the different areas of the attack surface. As new technologies come into play, that means new attack surfaces are available to these malicious actors out there. So we really are trying to figure out a little bit better, how to deal with the attack surface evolution that's happening today. And then we also asked areas where organizations have the least security insight. So where's my visibility lacking in my infrastructure? And you can see here, 37% said cloud assets, 34% said their network traffic, network analysis, and 32% said end user assets. And many of those are likely some of the non-traditional end user endpoints that we are seeing. So whether it's non-Windows devices, IoT devices, industrial IoT devices, their OT network, so to speak. But also, I think as I mentioned earlier, we're getting into accounts. So credential theft is huge. And one of the tactics that is used by the malicious actors, and a lot of organizations in the past may not have even thought about, how do I harden up my accounts? And they are definitely being targeted. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data that we obtained. So if you look at the threats year over year, on the left side, you can see we have a query system. So when customers, for example, hit a website or open a file or download a file, they're going to query us to identify, is this a good file, good website, a bad file, bad website? And you can see here, we're almost at 3 trillion queries in the first half. That's a 10% increase from last year's first half of last year. On the right-hand graph, you see this is threats blocked. So these are threats that targeted our customer base, and we blocked them. So again, this is not infections; these are detections. So we prevent the threat from hitting our customers' networks or their devices. And you can see in the first half, we blocked 63 billion, almost 64 billion threats that were targeting our customers, and that's a 56% increase year over year. So obviously, the malicious actors are very active. This number has been growing steadily year over year, both first half, second half, and as yearly as well as bi-yearly. So that's certainly concerning to us. The malicious actors are definitely getting more prolific out there. One of the areas when we break down, so we can break down these threats by different attack areas, so whether it's email or web or file. And on the file side, you can see in this chart, we actually had a 95% increase in malicious file detections year over year. So from first half 21 to first half 22, you can see 22 billion malicious files were blocked. So one of the things, people wonder about, why would we be seeing this massive increase? So we went from 1 billion in the first half of 2020 all the way to 22 billion in first half of 22. So 2 years space, we've added 21 billion malicious file detections. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, we've actually gotten a better at our back-end architecture and infrastructure. So we're actually being able to identify more detections. So our customers were getting detections, but we weren't actually pulling that information to us. So we've gotten better at the data gathering stage. But more importantly, and more what we are starting to see is that these actors are now doing campaigns inside your network. So it's not just dropping a piece of malware, and that's the beginning and the ending of my attack. My attack now is going across the network. And so you're seeing a lot more of the malicious files being used in the full campaign across the network. So a lot more files are being introduced in the network that we're able to actually detect and block, which is good news. But certainly the challenge there is that you're seeing more and more of malicious files being used in these attacks. Now let's talk about some of the big key areas that we found in the first half. So the first area is ransomware. The ransomware landscape obviously continues to evolve, continues to change. Lots of new players that keep coming into this place. The monetization methods that continue to change over time. One of the big areas we're seeing is with the ransomware as a service. And you can see here, we tracked 57 active ransomware as a service groups and extortion groups in the first half. Quite a few out there, obviously. There's new ones coming on the scene all the time. We also looking at leak sites. You can see over 1,200 victim organizations that were targeted by these 57 groups that are out there. And ransomware as a service, obviously, one of the areas that this allows the ransomware team groups to help with is they get these affiliates that actually perform the attack and do the attack, but then they get the ransomware team groups get a cut of it or they provide a cut of the overall ransom to their affiliates. Now, one of the things that does is that insulates that group from a lot of the law enforcement agencies targeting, because what the law enforcement sees is the actual attack, and that's done by the affiliates. And so you're seeing this, unfortunately, where these ransomware as a service groups are able to continue to operate around the world and do what they do best. And they just, an affiliate group gets arrested, they just bring on a new affiliate group. We're seeing a lot more competition. So they have to actually compete now in the underground for affiliates. And so what they're doing now is they're offering better tools, they're offering more automation capabilities, they're offering even services like, I will identify the victim for you, and then you just take the tools and utilize it and go and do the attack yourself, and then we'll take our cut. And so again, that's concerning, because these groups are getting a lot more sophisticated and they're getting a lot better at what they're doing, mainly out of competition that they have to do in the underground for business. Now you can see there were three real key groups out there: Lockbit, Conti, and Black Cat. Were the top three that we saw detecting and infecting organizations. And you can see their growth year over year. So first half, we saw a big growth. Black Cat actually started in 2022, so they didn't have a 2021 number because they're new to the scene. But you can see the number of groups out there. These three groups were pretty significant in terms of the victims that they were targeting. Let's dive a little bit into Lockbit. Lockbit's an interesting one. They, if you recall, in the first half, they started a bug bounty program, which is unique to that industry, and that where they are now offering a bug bounty for people to identify bugs in their leaked sites, in any of their malware that they're utilizing, those kind of things. So that's certainly an interesting move by them. But you can see also, and Lockbit started actually in 2019, so they've been pretty active over the last several years. They continued to do business out there. In 2020, they offered a RAS affiliate program. So they went into the ransomware as a service model in 2020 and started using a leak site. And a few months later, they began to the double extortion model, which is used by most of these gangs also. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But you can see here, there's two ways that they initially access and do their campaigns inside organizations. One's with a compromised IIS server that then drops PowerShell script to a backdoor that then drops a Lockbit ransomware. The other one is brute forcing VPN servers and targeting SMB, Microsoft RAS servers. They drop the Lockbit ransomware. They do PowerShell commands and do more Lockbit ransomware. So a number of different ways that this Lockbit group. So, and this is pretty common among these ransomware groups, where they will offer up multiple ways of utilizing their campaigns, so to speak. So definitely there. We also found that they deploy post-exploitation tool Mimikatz. So they utilize Mimikatz, which is kind of the living off the land type of tool. And again, that's another common theme that we see. Now, Conti, this isn't, Conti's been in the news quite a bit. Originally, one of the things they did when the Russia invaded Ukraine, they came out in favor of Russia. They said they were in support of the Russian regime and that they would target any organizations or any people that targeted the Russian businesses or networks or government agencies. So they certainly are very well affiliated with the Russian government. But we've seen them being brought down, taken down. We saw a lot of their operations were leaked by one of the affiliates, probably an affiliate that was located in Ukraine. Not really happy with them being in Russia, so they outed them, so to speak. You can see that I think Brian Krebs published that not too long, earlier this year. A fascinating reading. They had over 100 employees in their operation at the time, so it's quite interesting. But you can see here, if you look at their their life cycle. And this kind of goes to the point that a lot of these groups utilize very similar tactics and techniques and procedures, TTPs, in their attacks. And so, for example, initial entry and execution, you can see here, they use a firewall exploit or they use a phishing email, right? And then they do network discovery. So once they're inside, and again, they can target an employee or they can target a vulnerability, an exploit, use an exploit of a vulnerability on an open IP facing device. And once they're inside the network, they will then map out your network. They'll utilize NetScan, they'll utilize ShareFolder, a number of tools that are available to them that they will then run to scan and map out your network and identify things. Then they do credential access and privilege escalation. So I mentioned that earlier. So they'll look for accounts, try to find accounts, especially your domain accounts, administrator accounts, exchange administrator accounts. They even look for your security products administrator accounts so that they can then potentially turn them off. Command and control always going to be built out as a command and control infrastructures because that maintains that access to the network for them. Lateral movement is key because again, they're not going to find what they want at that initial access point. So they have to laterally move across your network. Once they've mapped it out, that's when they start laterally moving maybe into your OT network, into your cloud environment, into your data center, looking for those assets that they want to do. And then exfiltration. So again, this is one of those methods where there are double extortions. So they're going to exfiltrate key data from you first, and then they will then do lateral movement, defense evasion. They may turn off your security products running on your servers or on your endpoints because they have those credentials to be able to do that. And then they will then drop the ransomware, the Conti ransomware on the devices and on those critical systems. So that once they pop up their ransom note, you as an organization has got to make that determination, do I pay the ransom or not? And if you don't, you tell them you're not going to pay the ransom, that's when they come back with the double extortion model where they're going to go, okay, well, we stole a bunch of critical data and sensitive data from you. And if you don't want us to leak it or sell it in the underground, pay us this extortion fee. So that's Conti's a very, very sophisticated group, very well known. They obviously got taken down just recently, but again, I personally don't believe that means they're gone. I think what they may be doing is adjusting, maybe coming up. They won't be known as Conti any longer. They may come up as a different name, even though why would you even name yourself? Or they may be spreading out and getting jobs with other cyber criminal groups that are in that region of the world. Now, Black Basta is a new one that came in just in April of 2022 when a user named Black Basta posted on major underground forums that they were looking for access to corporate networks. So again, this access as a service or even request to access networks is happening all the time in these underground forums. And then people who have those access already can then provide that service for a fee to these folks. A lot of times what they were looking for were organizations in the US, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. So certainly some of the big areas where a lot of funded businesses reside, and that's what they're looking at. On the right side, you see actually, this is an option for when they have a victim, they will pop up this screen on the victim site and ask the victim to log in and so that they can have a conversation with them. And this is another common tactic where, in the past, if you recall, a lot of times the ransom note would pop up and it would actually give you the ransom amount in the note. Today, that's no longer done at all because they want to negotiate. So they're going to negotiate. And a lot of times they want to negotiate only with certain people inside the organization. So they'll give you an ID number that allows them to know who they're talking to. It also gives them the ability to focus who they're talking to in the organization so that they don't have multiple conversations going on inside that business. And so they enter it, you can enter that information and then enter the chat, and then you can start negotiating with them. So Black Boss is another one. You can see here again, this is their attack life cycles. So you see starts with a spear phishing email that uses Quackbot to a download site. Then they use CoBeacon and Cobalt Strike is another tool that they utilize. To then do exfiltration. Again, they're a multiple extortion, so they'll exfiltrate data. They'll laterally move to defense evasion, as they all do, and then drop ransom as the last piece. Now, one of the things we did see also in the first half was an increase in ransomware targeting Linux. So VM hypervisor, the ESXi, was under heavy fire in the first half. We definitely saw that. You can see here, first half of 21 to 22, we had about a 900, 800 plus numbers increase in the ransomware targeting Linux. Lockbit operators announced a Linux-based variant that they were going to utilize. In May 2022, a new ransomware variant named CheerScript was also found targeting ESXi. So VMware certainly is under fire by malicious actors out there, and their software runs heavily on Linux, and so we're definitely seeing that. So some of the tactics, as I mentioned before, operators are using more levels of extortion. So we even see quadruple extortion, where they actually directly communicate with your customers. So when they steal that data, a lot of times that data is going to include supplier contact information, customer information, and they may have actually contact those people and the organizations and say, hey, you should put pressure on this group because we have some of your data that we would sell in the underground. So you want to tell that your customer or the original victim to pay the extortion fee so that your information doesn't get out there. So it definitely helps pressure organizations to pay one of the extortions or multiple extortions as they go through. So let's talk a little bit about futures. First thing is multiple extortion attacks are definitely going to continue. So they will continue to be doing activities inside your network before they drop ransomware. Ransomware is typically going to be the last component of an attack because it's very visible. Obviously, it's very noisy. So they'll be doing things and it could be days, months ahead of the ransomware attack. They could be doing things inside your network. Definitely a more targeted approach. So we call that big game hunting, where they're going to be looking for key victims that they realize and they've analyzed and they know would be more likely to pay. Collaboration within that underground community is definitely going to continue. We're going to see an increase in that. So access as a service brokers will be selling access to ransomware as a service affiliates to get access into those accounts, again, after they've probably done other things. But certainly that expertise is growing in the underground community. So these groups are starting to become more well known and they're doing just small portions. So the likelihood that you actually could have multiple groups inside your network is getting higher and higher as we move forward, which obviously makes it a little more difficult because they may utilize different TTPs in the different areas or different components of the attack. Some of the top threats that we're seeing is part of the attack, credential theft I mentioned before. The exploitation of public-facing devices and systems is very high. So that's one of the initial access as well on how to get into the organization is they're exploiting open IPs, public-facing infrastructure. And then the early use of living off the land tools, so that mapping the network, lateral movement is all going to be done through a lot of those known tools that are being used. And some of these tools are tools that you may be using already inside your organization to do the same thing. So they're going to use those and try in the hopes that those ideas. So this is where if you can identify some of these early warning malwares that come into or happen inside your organization on your network, you may be able to to stave off a future ransomware attack because you realize that this is probably part of a campaign inside my network, and get some information. That's where, for example, utilizing the MITRE map or attack framework may be able to help out as well. All right, let's shift to targeted attacks. So one of the things that we hear out there is that Trend Micro is this old legacy vendor who only focuses on malware. And certainly, you know, I'm kind of glad we focus on malware when we're blocking 22 billion malware threats that are targeting our customers in the first half of the year. So targeting malware isn't a bad thing, but certainly the threat landscape has evolved. And so we're seeing more of these APT groups like Earth Luska, Earth Berberoka. These are groups that we have been targeting and tracking. We're doing more and more of this. We're even moving into more campaign analysis. So instead of necessarily saying, you know, Earth Berberoka is a group, and we're going to focus on what are the TTPs, what are the campaigns that they are launching and using inside organizations. And so you'll be able to identify either through the name of the group or through a campaign that potentially is being used by the group or by different actors out there. So when we looked at Earth Luska, this was an interesting one group that we saw, likely an actor in China, but they're using VPN and proxy servers to get initial access into the organization. So they use either compromised servers or they use VPS, virtual private servers, that they've secured and utilized in the attacks. And you can see they use Cobalt Strike. They use a watering hole, spear phishing, to do spear phishing attacks on the victim's computer. They use public-facing servers out there, and then they laterally move in the internal internal servers. So they're looking for servers inside the organization, which allows them to look for data, and a lot of the data that they look. Some of their high-value targets, they were looking at governments, government agencies, educational institutions, political groups, news media. Even COVID-19 research organizations were targeted by this group out there. And they deploy a number of malwares that, besides Cobalt Strike, they use ShadowPad, Funny Switch, Winty, some of the different malware families that they use in their attacks as well. So this group obviously is one that we've been monitoring for a while now. And we did see them active in the first half of the year. We got reports on a lot of these groups on our website. If you go to the research section, you can do a search on Earth Luska, for example, and it'll bring you to show you the page where that's available. And then Earth Berberoka, this one is, they're an interesting group. They've been active since about 2020. They used a backdoor chat app called Mimi. You can see this, which is an interesting one. It's based on a website that's written in Chinese. Mimi is a secret chat app where Mimi actually means secret, and that's available on both Windows and Mac OS. So you can see here, depending on which operating system you're running, it's going to either load PlugX malware if it's Windows, or it's ORAT malware if it's a Mac OS environment. So they are certainly targeting non-Windows devices and more Macintosh devices that organizations may be utilizing. You can see a couple of different options that they have in their campaigns. So the first one obviously used that backdoor. The other one is exploiting a cross-site scripting vulnerability in legitimate websites. So they'll look to the victim maybe going to these legitimate websites that they have compromised using a cross-site script vulnerability. And then that allows them to get access to that person and potentially inside the organization. So certainly, Earth Berberoka was another APT group that we've been tracking for a long time, and we've written a number of articles and research reports on them. So some of the tactics that we're seeing by these APT groups, the intelligence gathering that happens ahead of the of the attack. So they will, again, look for the type of organization that they want to target. So they'll have a motive in mind before they do anything. So whether it's credential theft or data theft or a ransomware attack or whatever it might be, right? They will figure out who they want to target, how do they want to target them, when do they want to target them, where do they want to target them. All of that's going to be known upfront before they do anything. The targeting of more non-Windows assets is happening, and you're going to see that more and more. As we saw earlier with the Linux ransomware, we're seeing it more in cloud infrastructure as cloud infrastructure gets targeted, which tends to be non-Windows focused. Also OT networks, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The utilizations of anti-forensics. So this is where they are looking to get around security controls. So bypassing security controls or ensuring that their malware isn't detected. So I was talking to one of our IR group leaders recently, and he was mentioning that we'd be monitoring a site, and we would see a detection of a specific piece of malware. And then within hours, we would start seeing variants regularly popping up. So you know that these groups are actively monitoring their detections of their software or their malware. And when they identify that the security product has detected them, they will just go back and figure out ways of getting around it, build a new variant, add a different packer associated with it, or do something. So the anti-forensics is definitely extensively used and will continue to be done. These attacks, as I said earlier, are going to go across your entire network. They're not going to stop and start and stop at the endpoint only. It's going to move laterally across your network. It's going to go into your cloud infrastructure. It's going to go in, they're going to utilize email. They're going to utilize web. They're going to utilize lots of different attack surfaces that they're going to in their attacks. And so organizations are going to have to look at, how do I have better visibility across the entire stack? And then island hopping and supply chain attacks, we're going to see more of that in the future as well. Now, some of the futures, besides what I just talked about, these attackers, the way they're going to get into organizations and maintain presence in the organization, they're going to continue to look for human errors. So have I misconfigured an application that allows them now to get access? Did I make a mistake in setting up my configurations or setting up my security stuff? IT security complacency. Is the organization not patching in time? Are they not putting together some of the enabling some of the advanced detection technologies that are available to them? So complacency. Technical deficiencies that they are identifying as well. You're also going to see them targeting more cloud infrastructures, obviously, as more and more businesses move to the cloud. And we saw a massive amount of that during the pandemic. That infrastructure is definitely going to be targeted more and more in the future. And then OT networks. One of the interesting aspects of OT networks is we're seeing a lot more of educational attacks. So these are attacks where the motive of the attack is just to learn what can be done inside the OT network. So you're not going to see a ransomware drop, or you're not going to see a destructive attack there. You're just going to, you may not even see the activity, because all they're looking for is, can I get access to this system or not? Can I turn something on and off very quickly so it's not identified? What can I do? So these educational type of attacks, we're going to see more and more of, especially in the OT network. And then certainly they'll continue to change their TTPs as they need to be able to stay competitive and be able to continue to get access to these accounts. All right, let's shift to vulnerabilities. This is interesting. If you're not familiar with the 0-day initiative, this is a bug bounty program that Trend Micro has is a part of Trend Micro. And so what they do is they have about 10,000 researchers around the world that submit bugs to them, and then they will pay for these bugs, and that payment could be anywhere from $1,000 to even upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the severity, depending on what is being targeted. They do regular events called Pawn to Own. We just announced a new Pawn to Own out of Toronto. It's going to be doing some IoT. So again, and this is the beauty of the Zero Day Initiative bug bounty program, is we can pinpoint what types of bugs we want our researchers to submit to us, because we can actually do incentives. We can do higher bounties on certain bugs. Business critical software. For example, in the most recent one we did in Vancouver, we hacked a Tesla. So, those are the kind of things. And so we look at the Zero Day Initiative, the Pawn to Own events. They look at business critical software. They look at IoT, industrial IoT. We look at SCADA, ICS. All of those types of platforms and infrastructures are being utilized and being pulled through the Zero Day Initiative. So I'm going to give you some information on that program year over year. First one you can see is the number of vulnerabilities submitted in the first half was higher than last year, 770 last year and 944 this year. So 23% increase in the number of vulnerabilities submitted. So that's a good thing. We're seeing our researchers out there are submitting more bugs to us. We're paying out more money than we've ever done in the past. The beauty of the program also is that we manage that disclosure process with the vendor. So the actual researcher who finds the bug doesn't have to go through the hassle of dealing with that vendor. Also, we can put pressure on that vendor because we will ODay them, which means if they choose not to fix not to patch the bug, we can put pressure on them by saying, hey, we are going to announce that a bug was found and it doesn't have a patch. And many times when we go back to the vendor and tell them that, they will say, okay, we're going to get a patch out shortly. But you can see on the right side that the high severity bugs went up pretty significantly from 553 in the first half of last year to 645 submitted this year. So good news. Again, these are high severity bugs. These are ones that are a little more critical to businesses. The critical ones you can see in the red line went from 16 last year to 80 this year. So all of that's good news that our researchers out there, independent researchers out there, are finding more bugs. We also do have internal researchers that are finding bugs for us as part of the program, but certainly that the beauty of the program is that we have these 10,000 researchers out there that help us identify and bring these bugs to light, as well as obviously then working with the vendor to responsibly disclose that bug and get a patch out there as quickly as possible. Now, if you look at, and one of the benefits that also brings us is the ability to provide IPS rules, so virtual patches for our customers. So we take that bug information that it's submitted to us, and then we will turn around and develop virtual patches for our customers to be able to virtually patch those vulnerabilities and then block exploits. In a lot of cases, for example, our tipping point customers, which is our, on the left-hand side, you can see the information coming from our tipping point products that are out there in the world. We, on average in 2021, had 102 days of pre-patch, virtual patch before the public patch was made available by the vendor, because we knew about it early. So we had over 3 months of protecting our tipping point customers from an exploit of that vulnerability while the vendor created and published the patch. But you can see on the left-hand side there, we had 15 million hits of an asterisk vulnerability. You can see OpenSSL was in there, IIS, SharePoint, Jungle, Realtek, BEA, again, Microsoft Edge, Adobe Cold Fusion. So again, one of the beauties of this capability is that we can go very broad with the number of applications and operating systems that we will provide virtual patches to. On the right-hand side, this comes from our deep security, which is now Apex One workload security, and there's a server and an endpoint component where we provide virtual patches. And you can see, for example, that 2017 had 114 billion hits in the first half. huge number of things. And that's a memory leak and DNS mask. So they're looking to involve DNS response creation, so targeting DNS. But again, you can see here, look at the dates on a lot of these. The 20 on the left-hand side, 2017, 2014, 2000, 2010, 2011. On the right-hand side, you see a 2006, you see a 2009, 2010. Again, these are the types of the vulnerabilities. It's not all about 0 days. And in many cases, they are using end day. We'll talk about this in a minute here, but already previously patched vulnerabilities are heavily targeted by these criminal actors. Now, one of the things we actually have capability of in our Vision 1 platform product is we can identify companies that are exposed to highly exploitable vulnerabilities. You can see here, out of the total number of customers that we have on Vision 1, which is 4,867 customers, 4,138 had exposure to highly exploitable vulnerabilities, meaning they hadn't patched those vulnerabilities. Good news is a lot of them have virtual patches using our technology. So, but again, this is information from our back end as well. Now, Spring for Shell, this was on March 31st, Spring Framework published that their open source Java framework had a vulnerability called CVE 2020-22965. It kind of got billed as called Spring for Shell. It was very similar to Log for Shell, if you recall that vulnerability that hit. But it runs on the Spring Framework versions. And so we started tracking. We had a number of rules, virtual patching rules. You can see here, there's 4 virtual patch rules that came out from Trend Micro to virtually block these exploits. And you can see, again, from March 31st is when it was disclosed. We started seeing attacks already in April. And you can see that was actually the highest number was in April. So the malicious actors took advantage very quickly of a known published vulnerability to exploit it to a point where we saw 50,000 hits in April. Obviously, it dropped from that point on, but still we're seeing exploits today targeting customers with that. So certainly the time frame of when a vulnerability is published to when it's being exploited, that window continues to shrink more and more, which is again why it's imperative that you build up a better patch management or utilize virtual patching. So let's talk a little bit about futures. Most attacks are going to use end days. And again, an end day vulnerability is a known vulnerability that has a patch. So that's going to continue to be the #1 vulnerability type that is going to be targeted. But more 0 days will be used in attacks. And in fact, last year, I think Google's patch program or research team found that the most 0 days were used in attacks last year than ever before. And they tracked about 24 used in the first half of 2022. 24 of them, 12 of those actually were variants of previous ones. So the patch wasn't fully patched, didn't fully patch it. So they actually found a way around the patch and they had to issue a second patch to protect it. So, but more 0 days. And again, a lot of that is because these groups are very well funded, so they can actually buy 0 days now, because 0 days are not cheap. They can be anywhere from $500,000 to a couple $1 million. But again, if I'm making 10 million on a ransomware attack, a $500,000 investment upfront may not be a bad decision for them. Something I've talked about in the past is forever days. IoT devices will have forever days, and what that forever day means is essentially a lot of cases an IoT device manufacturer. A lot of times these are consumer devices, but it could be an industrial IoT, for example, or something where the manufacturer develops the product, puts software into that product, into that device, and then decides that they will that device only has a certain amount of shelf time and lifetime, and they're not going to patch it. They're just not going to hire the programmer to when a vulnerability is found. It's not worth their time and effort. So we will see forever days occurring as we move forward. Non-Windows OS's vulnerabilities are going to be exploited more often. We saw a lot with iPhones. We saw it with mobile phones, obviously, IoT devices, Linux, as I mentioned before. Those will all be targeted as well. More business critical applications will be exploited and targeted. Again, if I can get access to your critical systems, your systems that run your day-to-day operations, and utilize an exploit of a vulnerability there, I'm going to be better off being able to get access to it much better. All right, cloud threats. So this is an area where we're starting to see more and more that one of the main threats in cloud infrastructure today is misconfigurations. Probably the biggest cause of breaches of data today are misconfigurations of cloud infrastructure. And so this information comes from our cloud conformity team, which actually has a product that can identify misconfigurations and alert organizations when a cloud account makes a configuration change to an application. And you can see here on Amazon Web Services, we looked at 5 different areas: Macie2, Comprehend, CloudWatch Logs, Cost Explorer, and Inspector. You can see the high risk rules that we have associated with it and medium risk rules. But you can see on the left-hand side, this is the misconfiguration rate that we saw in each of these areas of AWS. And you can see it goes from 92.8, basically 93% misconfiguration rate, all the way to almost 100% in Macie2. So certainly this is a challenge for a lot of businesses, because this is a lot of times it's new technology to them. So the administrators of it haven't been well trained on it, and they don't understand a lot of times what making a configuration change, what the ramifications of that configuration change can be, which is why a lot of organizations are now looking at technology to identify a misconfiguration for them, like conformity. This was on Microsoft Azure. You can see we had high risk rules, medium risk rules, even some low risk rules, but you can see from Advisor and Locks, there was 100% misconfiguration rate. So everybody who had that, we found that had those services running in Azure, within our customer base, misconfigured it at some point in time. And the other ones are 98, almost 99%. So huge amount of misconfigurations in Microsoft Azure. So that's where obviously training and education is going to be key. On Google Cloud, certainly you can see the number of rules, high, medium, and low risk, but a little bit better on Google than I'd expect. But you can see here from 64% up to 98%. So still over a 50% misconfiguration rate on a lot of their stuff. We also, in the first half, saw cloud tunneling services being targeted. If you're not familiar with what a cloud tunneling service is, it's used to expose a service through a cloud system so as to be obscure to original source. So in a lot of cases, what happens is, like in a testing environment, you want to expose that cloud service to the internet to do some testing. Whereas if you have some security software or security running that may block that access, that's where a cloud tunneling service will come into play to allow you to actually get access and do some of that work. Now, obviously, that can cause challenges. And what we saw here, for example, there's both internal and external threats associated with cloud tunneling. You can see in this chart here, or this table, cloud tunneling service binary is in internal threats. It's a server is running on a machine in the corporate network, whereas on an external one, it's a server is running remotely. So they've configured it to run remotely, and some of the TTPs that are utilized that we're seeing in these types of attacks. Lateral movement and data exfiltration on the internal threat side. On the external threat side, that's pretty much like typical hacking you're going to see. So malware, hosting, CNC servers being utilized, phishing scams, exploit kits, all of those are going to be running. So if you utilize a cloud tunneling service, you may want to read up on that research. It's available. You can see the link on the bottom of the page here. That gives you a link to that research report that we published. But certainly cloud tunneling services are being utilized more and more by organizations as part of their research and development cycles. And so, and then obviously, again, that opens up an attack surface that wasn't necessarily there before, that allows attackers to take advantage of. So some of the futures, and this comes from my friend and colleague, Mike Milner, who's one of our cloud evangelists. I asked him about some of the futures, and he came up with a couple of these that I wanted to share with you. So misconfiguration, certainly. This is going to be a problem continuing. It's going to continue to be the leading threat as this technology continues to evolve, new capabilities. Like I said, cloud tunneling services weren't available a number of years ago. Now they're being utilized more and more. So it's new technology that can obviously be misconfigured. But application and API level threats, so public exploit endpoints of applications in the cloud give access to the application, but it exposes that application to malicious interests. So that's that public-facing infrastructure that can be a challenge for a lot of these cloud infrastructures. Supply chain, a lot of the cloud is using third-party applications, but also open source. A lot of the open source vulnerabilities you probably saw, Log4Shell, Spring4Shell, those are open source environments, and so that can be a challenge for a lot of organizations if you don't know your supply chain. So that's where SBOMs are starting to, which is a software bill of material. That's where that's starting to come into play, and you may want to be talking about that with your vendors. Because if you don't know it's running and using open source, and that can be a problem because obviously open source is open to anybody, even attackers who can find a vulnerability in it. And then cryptocurrency mining, I'll talk about this in a minute here, but that certainly is an area that's going to be a challenge for cloud infrastructure. We're seeing a number of those. So let's talk about some of the generic threats that we're seeing. Emotet is an interesting one. It actually debuted in 2014 and as a banking malware, but it's evolved, and the goop behind it has evolved it with the times. And so Conti used it, Ryuk used it in 2021. Its infrastructure, and you can see here, this is the news I posted here. In January of 2021, their infrastructure was taken down. So everybody was maybe a thought, hey, Emotet's dead. But the reality, if you look at, this is detections of Emotet month over month that we had, you can see certainly it did drop, right? In January of 21 on the left-hand side, it was it was maybe 5,000, but it dropped steadily till July of 21, and then kind of stayed steady there. And the low point was September in 2021, but then we started to see an increase. And you can see in January and in 2022, we actually started to see a big spike in Emotet. And even in March, we had a spike of upwards almost 50,000 in that detections in that month. So Emotet certainly is being used. You can see it went from 13,000 in the first half of 21 to almost 150,000 in the first half of 22. This is the typical process or attack lifecycle that where Emotet is used. So malspam to a macro that runs a PowerShell script, and then it downloads from the web Emotet and drops Emotet, which does process injection on a number of things, and it includes a command and control and download to an additional payload. So we see Emotet a lot of times, like I mentioned, Conti and Ryuk ransomware gangs. They use it as that part of that initial phase of their attack. So if you detect Emotet in your environment today, the likelihood that that's a part of a campaign that could be a ransomware attack, for example. It could be the preclude of a data stealing attack. All of that could happen. So Emotet certainly is one that if you detect, you should be concerned about. Some of the top malware we saw in the first half, web shell was the #1 threat we saw, malware detection we saw. That's a piece of malicious code often written in web development programming that runs on websites. So they're certainly looking for web servers to target. Emotet, as I said before. Coin miners, I'll talk about that in a minute. The two that I wanted to highlight were Downad and WannaCry. Downad actually is a worm. It was a vulnerability that has been public, that was patched in 2008, I believe, but we still see this popping up every single month. We see Downad detections. And I got to caveat that. WannaCry and Downad, they're worms. Worms are very difficult to eradicate fully. There's always going to be a vulnerable system typically out there in the world that can become an infection source. And then it will continue to try and infect other systems out there. So mostly it's just noise because you're detecting it and blocking it. But if you do have a vulnerable device on your network, it could become an infection source. And then you're just going to have to deal with that spewing because that worm wants to propagate and it wants to propagate. But you see a lot of those detections. And again, it's mostly noise. You can see crypto mining has dropped significantly since first half of 2018. Probably a number of reasons. One, obviously, cryptocurrency fluctuations are challenging, but also the amount of resources it takes to mine is pretty high these days for the payout. And so we're seeing a decrease in that. But we did see an increase in Linux-based cryptocurrency miners. So again, Linux servers may be better powered and able to mine more efficiently than Windows. So the attackers are going to shift their attacks towards that, which is why we're seeing more cloud-based crypto mining. These were some of the crypto mining groups that we have been monitoring and following in the first half that were pretty active with cryptocurrency miners and dropping those around the world. We have a whole report around that. IoT, I mentioned IoT. We have devices out there in the world that are in home networks and analyze traffic into and out of home networks. We also look at we're running on a number of the ASUS products. But you can see here, Cyclops Blink is a botnet, modular botnet that was active in the first half. It was targeting ASUS routers, but also WatchGuard fireboxes. You can see here the IoT threat year over year didn't change too much, but it did increase a little bit. So certainly they're going to continue to target IoT devices out there and utilize. In a lot of cases, these are setting up botnets. So they're actually infecting these devices in order to utilize them in other attacks that they want to run off of these devices. On the mobile side, we actually saw a decrease in mobile things, but one of the notable mobile malware-related instances was fake mobile apps disguised as cryptocurrency miners. So people were looking to mine cryptocurrency. They may download an app for it, and those apps tended to be, a lot of them were malicious. So certainly that's a challenge. So the future, continued collaboration among these groups, expanded extortion opportunities overall are going to continue. More attacks, but the targeting continues. That big game hunting we're going to see more and more of, even though our numbers are not showing that, because again, we had a 56% increase in the number of total blocks year over year to up to 62, almost 63 billion threats blocked in the first half. Attack surface exploration is going to continue. They're going to target weak hygiene. So let's talk a little bit about defenses. I know we only have a couple of minutes here, and I'll apologize to the questions coming in. I'll have to take those afterwards, but I wanted to get through this. First and foremost, we started this out talking about the attack surface, so I wanted to highlight this attack surface area for you and some of the things you want to look at this point. first and foremost, you have to discover your attack surface. And that includes your external facing surface, your internal facing surface. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. If you don't know about it, you're not going to be able to protect it. So look for technologies today that can help improve your discovering of your attack surface. Once you've discovered that attack surface, the next step is to assess the risk of those assets. So assess the risk across, your vulnerabilities of your devices or your software and operating system, the configuration of your security controls, the types of activities that you're seeing, the accounts that you have. All of that should be taken into account to assess the risk. Vulnerabilities, for example, it's very difficult. You can't just go to NIST and figure out, oh, the severity rating on this vulnerability is a 10, so I have to patch it. Maybe, maybe not. You really have to look at more factors of that vulnerability, and that's what we're hoping to provide more of. And then mitigating that risk. So once you assess it and you identify it, and you identify, are these critical to us and we need to do something about them, that's when you start deploying your mitigation capabilities. So preventative controls, XDR, EDR, those virtual patching, those kind of things can be deployed. But then also, this isn't a static thing. This has to be a constant, continuous visibility and assessment of this. So, because your attack surface is always going to change. You're bringing on new vendors, you're bringing suppliers, you're bringing on new devices, you're bringing in a new infrastructure, new cloud application, et cetera. So you have to continuously do that. So some of the best practices: develop and regularly test an incident response plan, harden your administrative accounts, utilize multi-factor authentication, monitor and identify the use of legitimate tools. This is an area where, again, if you can identify a tool like Mimikatz running or Cobalt Strike running, and it's a tool you don't utilize, or you identify that it's being done in an area of your network that typically is not, then you can look at blocking. Review your cybersecurity solutions with your vendors. Do they have the right approach? Am I utilizing the best practices of my security vendor? Do I have all of the advanced detection capabilities enabled that they offer me? Develop a risk-based approach to patch management. Again, you can look at the severity rating, but more importantly, look at, is it actively being exploited? That's where CISA's known exploitability vulnerability catalog, if you go to CISA and look for KEV, look for that and use that catalog. Those are actively exploited vulnerabilities in the wild. That can help you out. Is there a proof of concept associated with it? Develop and implement a security awareness training program. We just went through ours. I just got trained on insider threats. I also got trained on a couple of other threats. So, and regularly run these with your employees. That helps them understand, what are the attacks targeting me? And then invest in a cybersecurity platform that can help you give better visibility and control over your entire network. So this just shows you some of the stuff we do. Again, as I mentioned, we're probably the largest platform vendor in the world in terms of coverage of all the different threats we cover, all the different areas. We do small business, medium business, enterprise business. We do home networks. We do IoT, OT. We're doing vehicle stuff now. So I mean, we're in areas that affect you as a employee, but also we can cover you as a human being out there in the world. So love it. Love to talk to you. And with that, I'm going to close it up, everybody. Have a great day and look forward to you attending my monthly threat webinar next month. I'll be announcing the topic shortly, and stay safe, stay well, and we'll talk to you soon.